Pam Bondi thought she had the upper hand with a slick insult aimed at Jasmine Crockett on live TV, but what she didn't expect was a quiet, razor-sharp response that turned the entire room against her. It started like any other midweek panel. The set was clean, polished, camera angles tight, studio lighting warm and bright. 4 chairs, 4 women, and a nation watching. It was supposed to be a moderated discussion on policy and accountability. Instead, it became a defining moment. Representative Jasmine Crockett had been calm, even smiling, during the first half. She'd spoken with her usual rhythm, not rehearsed, but precise. She had a way of breaking down complex issues so the average viewer could follow without reaching for Google. That was part of her strength. She didn't talk down, but she didn't talk over heads either. Across from her sat Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General, now a recurring face on primetime panels, always poised, always firm. Bondi had a history of going in with sharp elbows and a smooth smile, especially when the cameras were live. The topic turned to legal integrity, and that's when the mood started shifting. "I think what we're seeing here," Bondi said, fixing her gaze on Crockett, "is a perfect example of someone who dresses things up with emotion because they lack the legal backbone to actually lead." There was no mistaking it. The studio fell quiet, not in that awkward pause where someone forgets what to say, but the kind of silence where even the control room freezes. Crockett didn't blink. She leaned slightly forward. She didn't laugh it off, didn't redirect, didn't smile politely like she was expected to. She let the silence sit just long enough for the weight of the comment to register. Then she spoke, low and deliberate. "Pam, I've prosecuted real cases, represented clients who couldn't afford to buy their way out of trouble. I didn't do it for applause or screen time. I did it because I believed the law should serve everyone, not just the ones who already had power." Her voice didn't rise. She didn't cut off. She waited, looked Bondi dead in the eyes, and continued, "And I find it interesting that you think empathy is a weakness. I know plenty of women who can wear a suit and still show compassion without losing credibility. Maybe that's what scares you." That line hit like cold water to the face. One of the other panelists shifted in her chair. Another glanced toward the moderator, who looked like she was debating whether to step in. But Crockett wasn't done. "You want to question my legal background," she said. "Let's do that. My record's public. Yours too. Except mine includes defending people without wealth or status. Yours includes defending people who had both and needed you to protect their image." Now the silence felt different, not stunned, but uncomfortable. Bondi opened her mouth, but nothing came right away. Her eyes blinked fast, lips parted as if searching for the right counter. Nothing landed. Her carefully manicured composure cracked for just a second, long enough for everyone watching, in the room and at home, to catch it. This wasn't just a verbal jab. It wasn't about scoring points or getting a soundbite to trend. It was a moment where lines were drawn between performative authority and lived conviction, between showmanship and substance. And Jasmine Crockett had just planted both feet on her side of that line. But what made this exchange hit even harder was what came next, not on air, but in how people responded once the cameras stopped. Before that moment made headlines, before clips flooded social media feeds, before people started quoting Jasmine Crockett like a cultural mic drop, these two women had already been on very different journeys. Jasmine Crockett wasn't born into politics. She grew up in Texarkana, Arkansas, the kind of town where folks know each other by name and don't mind asking how your grandma's doing. Her father ran a small trucking company, her mother worked in healthcare. Respect wasn't just expected, it was practiced. Church on Sundays, work on Mondays, and you always spoke up if something didn't sit right with your spirit. She went to Rhodes College in Memphis, then the University of Houston Law Center. She didn't come out of school with a Rolodex of elite contacts or a last name that opened doors. She started as a public defender, no flashing cameras, no Twitter threads, just courtrooms, long hours, and clients who trusted her with the most broken parts of their lives. There was this one case early in her career, a teenage boy, 17, barely holding himself together, accused of assaulting a police officer. The officer claimed the kid had swung at him, but Crockett got her hands on grainy cell footage from a bystander. What it showed was different. The boy hadn't swung, he had flinched out of fear. That footage changed everything. Charges were dropped, the kid stayed out of jail, went on to get his GED. That case stuck with her. It reminded her that every courtroom holds a story most people never hear, and those stories are worth defending. Pam Bondi's path was different. Born in Tampa, Florida, raised in a politically connected family, she had a front row seat to how power moves. She earned her law degree from Stetson University and rose quickly assistant state attorney, then elected Florida Attorney General. To her credit, Bondi was smart and ambitious. She made headlines going after prescription drug abuse in Florida, but she also made headlines for other things, like when her office declined to pursue fraud charges against Trump University after receiving a large campaign donation. That raised more than a few eyebrows. After she left office, Bondi took a polished turn into media, regular Fox News guest spots, political commentary, even a key role during Trump's impeachment defense. She became a recognizable face, for many a symbol of a tough, no-nonsense conservative voice. But that's where things start to rub, because while Bondi crafted her public image on control and polish, Crockett's strength came from raw experience, the courtroom trenches, the late nights reading case files, the real-time grind of representing people who'd never had a voice. They weren't just operating from different playbooks, they were playing different games. So when Bondi made that jab, that slick line meant to diminish, she wasn't just speaking to Crockett. She was echoing a larger narrative, one that women like Crockett hear too often, that empathy makes you weak, that fire makes you unstable, and that standing up without shouting is somehow less valid than dominating the room. And Crockett? Well, she knew that narrative all too well. She had heard it in courtrooms, at fundraising dinners, even in her own party behind closed doors. But there's something people forget about women like her, women who have had to fight twice as hard to be taken seriously in rooms built to keep them out. They're not here to play safe. They're here to be heard. Knowing where these women came from makes what happened next even more explosive, because the internet didn't just watch it, they picked sides. What made Jasmine Crockett's clapback so devastating wasn't just the words she chose, it was how she carried herself. She didn't throw her voice across the table. She didn't interrupt. She didn't lean on catchphrases or political zingers. No, she let Pam Bondi walk right into her own mess and then cleaned it up without lifting her voice above conversation level. It was the kind of response that makes everyone in the room pause, not because someone's yelling, but because the silence between their sentences says more than shouting ever could. "I'm not here to impress you," Crockett said, locking eyes with Bondi. "I'm not here to shrink myself down so someone else can feel taller. I got into law because I believe in balance. I ran for Congress because I got tired of watching that balance tip in favor of the loudest person in the room." Bondi tried to jump in, something about emotional instability, but Crockett held up her hand, palm flat. "No," she said. "You had your say. Now I'm going to finish mine." The moderator didn't intervene, probably because she didn't need to. The audience could feel the tension, but they also knew Crockett wasn't spiraling, she was steering. "You want to talk about legal backbone?" Crockett continued. "Let's talk about what it takes to represent a young mother in South Dallas who's been wrongfully evicted, with 3 kids and nowhere to go. Let's talk about arguing in courtrooms where judges already made up their minds before you walked in, where you're the only black woman in the room, and you still have to convince 12 people that the system they trust made a mistake." The camera cut to Bondi briefly. Her expression had tightened, but not in a way that suggested control. It was the kind of look people get when they realize a conversation didn't go the way they rehearsed in the mirror. Jasmine wasn't done. "You think law is just about degrees and titles? It's about lives. It's about people who don't look like you or live where you live or get invited to the same fundraisers. And if you think that kind of experience makes someone less qualified, maybe you've been sitting in the wrong courtrooms." That landed hard. Even the studio audience, which had been instructed not to clap or react, couldn't help a few quiet gasps. And then she did something rare. She turned slightly toward the camera, just a few degrees, enough to signal that she wasn't just talking to Bondi anymore. She was talking to everyone watching at home. "I know what it feels like to be underestimated," she said. "I know what it's like when people see your skin, your hair, your passion, and decide before you've even opened your mouth that you must not be serious. But let me tell you something, seriousness isn't about how calmly you can insult someone on live television. It's about what you do when no one's watching. It's about how many people sleep better at night because you went to work that day. Dead silence. The segment wrapped only a few minutes later. No one said it, but it was clear that whatever Bondi had planned, she'd lost control of the narrative. There was no recovery speech, no witty comeback, just a commercial break and then another topic completely unrelated. But everyone in the studio was still stuck in what had just happened. When the panel ended and the cameras cut off, the moderator leaned toward Crockett and whispered, "You just made news." She wasn't wrong. But the news wasn't just about a politician defending herself. It was about what happened when the public saw it, replayed it, and started making their own conclusions. By the time Jasmine Crockett made it to the parking lot, her phone was already vibrating nonstop, mentions, texts, missed calls. Her screen lit up like someone had flipped a switch. She hadn't planned on making a moment. She didn't storm out, didn't ask for applause. She just got in her car, exhaled, and called her assistant. Something happened, her assistant said before she could even speak. "You're trending." The clip had been posted by one of the network's social interns within minutes of the broadcast ending, a 48-second video titled "Representative Jasmine Crockett Shuts Down Pam Bondi Live." Within the hour, it was all over X, TikTok, and YouTube. Reactions poured in, not just from political junkies, but from everyday folks who saw something in Jasmine's calm that hit home. There was no filter, no flashy effects, just her voice, her words, and that steady gaze. Oh, a college student in Phoenix wrote, "That's how you stand up without losing yourself." A single mom in Kansas City posted, "Finally, someone said what we've all been thinking." Even a few conservative-leaning voices chimed in, admitting, "You might not like her politics, but you can't deny the way she carried herself." But as Crockett's words gained traction, Pam Bondi was watching her own name get dragged through digital mud. People were posting side-by-side comparisons, old video clips, past interviews, court decisions, campaign donation controversies. It wasn't just the jab that people had a problem with, it was what it represented, a tired, smug confidence that many viewers were done tolerating. Bondi tried to regain control. The next morning, she made an appearance on a local Florida radio show, claiming her comment had been misinterpreted and that she respected Crockett's accomplishments. But the host, clearly aware of the blowback, didn't let her off easy. "Do you think it's appropriate," he asked, "to imply someone lacks legal backbone because they speak with emotion?" There was a pause. Bondi replied, "I wasn't questioning her ability. I was addressing the tone of the conversation." Things got heated. He didn't press, but listeners weren't buying it. The damage had already sunk in. Online, creators and analysts were breaking down the moment frame by frame. There were think pieces, stitched reactions, reenactments. One former prosecutor even stitched the clip with his own commentary, saying, "I've worked with both types, the polished politician and the courtroom fighter. Give me someone like Crockett any day. That's who gets real work done." Bondi's defenders tried to push back. A few cable segments spun the story as an overreaction. One anchor said Crockett was playing the victim card, but that narrative didn't hold long, because too many people saw the footage for themselves. There was no yelling, no drama, just a woman standing her ground with composure and facts. For a generation raised on viral moments and TikTok debates, this one felt different. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic for the sake of it. It was powerful because it was measured. Jasmine hadn't asked to become a symbol, but people were making her one anyway. And she felt the weight of that. That night, sitting at her kitchen table, she read through the comments. Some made her laugh, some made her tear up, and some, the ones from young black girls saying thank you, made her sit back and stare at the screen for a long time. She didn't reply to them all, but she remembered every word. But as Crockett gained momentum, another story was starting to unfold, the quiet shift happening around Bondi, as her usual supporters began rethinking their stance. What most people didn't see that night, what never made it into the viral clips or trending threads, was how heavy it felt behind the scenes. Jasmine Crockett had learned early on that standing your ground didn't come free. It came with assumptions, whisper campaigns, and a constant fight to be seen as qualified without having to prove it every single time. After the panel, she didn't go to a victory dinner. She went home, dropped her bag by the door, and sat on the edge of her couch in silence. The glow from her phone screen lit up her face, but she wasn't scrolling for praise. She was reading the emails that had come in. Some were filled with admiration, others, not so much. There was one message from a man who claimed to be a former judge. He called her combative, said she lacked restraint. No mention of Bondi, no mention of the initial comment that started it all, just a lecture cloaked in condescension. She took a breath and hit delete. Jasmine had grown used to this kind of thing. When she was still practicing law in Dallas, there was a senior attorney who once told her, "You're sharp, but you smile too much. Judges won't take you seriously if you come off too friendly." She'd smiled anyway, won the case too. But even now, in Congress, the rules hadn't really changed. Speak up too soon, you're emotional. Wait too long, you're passive. Stand firm, you're aggressive. It was a tightrope she'd been walking for years, and somehow that panel had become another balancing act. Still, she didn't regret it. She spoke to her mother the next day, a quiet woman who rarely commented on politics but always paid attention. "You didn't raise your voice," her mother said over the phone. "That's what I noticed." Jasmine smiled. "I wanted to." "I know," her mother said, "but you didn't. That's strength, not silence." And she was right. Crockett knew she wasn't just speaking for herself in that moment. She was speaking for every black woman who's ever been talked over, brushed aside, or asked to tone it down just to be taken seriously. The most exhausting part wasn't the politics, it was the expectations, the unspoken rules about how women like her were supposed to behave. Show confidence, but not too much. Be assertive, but not intimidating. Lead, but don't forget to smile. And now, with thousands watching her every move in real time, she felt those expectations even more. Her team had started fielding interview requests, national outlets, morning shows, late-night segments. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Crockett wasn't in a rush to capitalize. She didn't want to be a moment, she wanted to be part of something that lasted. That night, after finishing her calls, she opened her laptop and pulled up an old photo, her first court case, hair tied back, no makeup, a folder of notes in her lap. She stared at it for a while, then closed the lid. She hadn't changed much, just the stage had. But while Crockett was navigating the pressure with grace, Bondi was beginning to feel her own version of fallout, and it wasn't coming from the public, it was coming from inside the walls she thought were solid. Pam Bondi wasn't used to backlash from her own circle. She'd spent years curating her place in conservative media, confident, composed, ready with a soundbite. She knew how to lean into controversy when it benefited her. But this time, the reaction wasn't what she expected. The morning after the broadcast, she logged onto her email to a quiet inbox, not empty, but lighter than usual. No congratulatory notes, no well said from former colleagues or political strategists. A few generic replies, mostly from assistants. The silence was loud. Then came the messages that actually did land. One longtime ally from Florida's legal community sent her a private message, "Pam, might want to sit this one out for a while." Another wrote, "Just being honest, this clip's doing more damage than good. The optics aren't great." And there it was, the word optics. It had never been about truth for some of them, it was about appearances. And now, Bondi was the one whose appearance needed cleaning up. She did a brief follow-up interview on a podcast she trusted, familiar host, friendly tone, hoping to steer the narrative. But the host surprised her. "Some folks felt that your comment came from a place of personal judgment," he said cautiously, "not policy critique." "Any thoughts?" Bondi paused, her voice carefully measured. "Look, I respect all women in public service, always have. I just believe passion should never overshadow professionalism." But it was too late for polished lines. People had seen the footage. They remembered her smirk, the casual jab, the way she had tried to reduce a congresswoman's credibility to an emotional performance. That kind of framing had been tolerated for decades, not anymore. Behind closed doors, even producers at the networks she regularly appeared on began reconsidering how often they'd book her for upcoming panels. A few suggested quietly that maybe they diversify the lineup more moving forward. No one said it outright, but she could feel the shift, that small, cold distance between her and the power she once held so easily. Bondi had always known how to play the game, but this time, the game had changed. People weren't just listening to what she said, they were watching how she reacted when someone refused to shrink under pressure. And her reaction, silence followed by spin, didn't inspire much confidence. Even some of her usual defenders on social media were staying quiet. A few tried to stir things up, calling the whole moment another overreaction from the left, but those comments barely made a ripple, because it wasn't about parties anymore. It was about respect, and the public saw exactly who showed it. What rattled Bondi most wasn't losing the debate, it was losing control of the conversation afterward. For the first time in a long time, she was being talked about instead of doing the talking. She kept her head down for the rest of the week, declined a few interview requests, skipped a scheduled appearance at a conference in Orlando. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. She needed time to regroup, maybe even rewrite the narrative in her next public statement. But even she knew some moments can't be rewritten. Some images stick, the look on her face when Crockett responded, the silence in the room, the way the audience leaned forward, not toward Bondi, but away from her. That couldn't be reshaped in a PR memo. And when the headlines faded and the feeds moved on, she'd still carry that silence with her. But the woman on the other side of that moment, the one who didn't raise her voice yet raised the conversation, she was just getting started. The truth is, Jasmine Crockett didn't walk into that studio thinking she was about to change anything. She didn't come with a pre-written monologue or a plan to go viral. She came prepared to speak on policy, offer her viewpoint, and move on. What happened instead was something she didn't script but something she had been preparing for her whole life. In the days after the exchange with Bondi, her calendar filled up faster than her team could manage interview requests, invitations to panels, speaking engagements from universities that previously didn't know her name. People were watching her now, not as a rising politician, but as a model of what leadership could look like when grounded in truth instead of ego. She took only a few interviews. She wasn't chasing screen time. The spotlight had found her, but she wasn't letting it shape her. In every conversation, she brought it back to the same message: you don't need to shout to be heard, you just need to speak with purpose. The story could have ended there, a clip, a moment, a few news cycles of commentary. But for many viewers, especially young women, especially women of color, that moment stuck deeper than most headlines. Because it wasn't just about politics, it wasn't about party lines. It was about being reduced, being dismissed, and choosing in that exact moment not to accept it. Teachers began showing the clip in classrooms to talk about conflict resolution. Law students discussed her approach in ethics seminars. Even corporate trainers used it as a teaching tool on how to handle difficult conversations with dignity. And Crockett? She went back to work. She walked the halls of Congress the same way she had before, focused, determined, not looking for praise, but always aware that someone was watching, some young girl back home, maybe a girl who might one day be underestimated too. At a town hall in Texarkana a few weeks later, an older woman stood up and asked her a question: "How did you stay so calm?" I would have lost it right there. Crockett smiled, because it wasn't about her. It was about everyone watching, she said, who needed to see that we don't have to meet disrespect with rage. We can meet it with truth, and sometimes that stings even more. The room clapped, but Crockett didn't bask in it. She just nodded and moved to the next question, always forward. As for Pam Bondi, she returned to television eventually. Her tone was more careful, her statements tighter. The edge was still there, but the confidence seemed a little more rehearsed. She never addressed the moment directly again. She didn't have to, people remembered it for her. What Jasmine Crockett reminded people that day was simple: your power doesn't come from how loud you are, it comes from how solid your foundation is when someone tries to shake it. And in that studio, under hot lights and pointed words, she stood steady, not to score points, not to perform, but to draw a line. A quiet one. One that said respect isn't up for debate. If you took something from this story, think about how you carry yourself the next time someone tries to shrink you. Hold your ground, speak your truth. And if this moved you, share it, like it, and hit subscribe, because stories like this matter, and so do the people who live them.